Hi everyone! Today I'm going to talk to you about Rönd, a fresh new open source project that has just been released. I'm Federico Maggi, Senior Technical Leader at my platform and one of the main contributors of Rönd. So let's find out what Rönd is. Rönd is a lightweight container that allows you to distribute security policy enforcement throughout your application. It lets you define policies to prevent undesired API accesses, to generate queries that should be executed on the database to extract only authorized data, and allows you to modify response payloads in order to remove sensitive information. Rönd was created by my platform and has been made generally available on GitHub. We took this decision because we love the open source community, and since the project is heavily based on other open source software, we wanted to give something back. To find out more about Rönd, you can check out the official documentation site and the repository. Okay, so why we created it? Well, in my platform, we needed to introduce strict security enforcement over what user could do with our APIs, and we have several constraints to match. First of all, we didn't want to change our codebase or to couple security controls with our codebase or architecture. Second, we didn't want to introduce any single point of failure in our architecture, and we needed to build something that was flexible enough to be evolved in the future and to let us build airbag rules on top of it. Last but not least, we wanted to be able to operate only on authorized data, and so be able in some way to extract such data from the database. How did we address this constraint? Well, we decided to start flexible, as I said before. We needed to build airbag rules on top of our security model, and we needed to extract authorized data from the database. To do so, a simple configuration wouldn't be enough, and we understood that we needed a programming language. For this reason, we integrated Open Policy Agent core into Rönd, which comes with a programming language named Rego. With Rego, we can define security policies as code and use them to build our security model. For those who don't know it already, Open Policy Agent is an open source general-purpose policy engine. It provides an SDK written in Go that allows us to integrate its core directly in our code base and be able to optimize performances of policy evaluation, prepare data and inputs information that are provided to the policy evaluation. Okay, now that we have defined that we would use Open Policy Agent, we decided that our security enforcement should be implemented in a separate code base, which is why Rönd exists. The choice of being in a separate code base allowed us to choose the right tool for the job, so Open Policy Agent, of course, and the Go programming language, which allows us to have fast performances even at high throughputs, and allows to integrate Open Policy Agent core with ease and low overhead into our code base, since it is written in Go itself. The last constraint we have to match is the introduction of single point of failures. Since we wanted to have no single point of failures and we have an architecture based on Kubernetes, we decided to adopt the sidecar container pattern. With this pattern, every pod that hosts a container that needs to be protected with Rönd simply hosts a sidecar container that intercepts all the traffic, performs the policy evaluation to understand whether the request is authorized or not, and decide whether to forward the API invocation to the application service or reject the API invocation. Of course, not always you cannot introduce any single point of failure. So in architecture that doesn't allow it, we designed Rönd to be able to be deployed as a standalone microservice that each of your APIs needs to invoke in order to evaluate security policies. Okay, so let's see the core features of Rönd and how you can use it in your application. As mentioned earlier, there are three core capabilities that Rönd provides. The first one being able to grant or deny access to the APIs based on the policy result, being able to generate a query to filter data before they are retrieved from the database, and being able to modify the response payload to ensure the API response only contains authorized data that the user can see. Okay, so how do you configure it? Rönd needs to be able to intercept API invocation, and to do so, it needs to know what APIs are exposed by your application service. To do so, we decided to use OpenAPI specification and extend it with some custom configurations. There are two ways Rönd can be configured, an automatic configuration and a manual configuration. Both are ways to provide the OpenAPI specification to Rönd. The first one being automatic, so Rönd at boot tries to fetch the OpenAPI specification from the application service and dynamically exposes the APIs provided in it. And the manual configuration simply allows you to deploy Rönd with the OpenAPI specification file mounted to it. Why we decided to use OpenAPI specification? Because we believe that it's a good practice to always have OpenAPI specification together with your code, and because the specification itself is extensible and allows us to define custom properties used to configure Rönd without needing an additional configuration file. Okay, so the most basic example that we can make is that Rönd can intercept the request and decide whether to reject the API invocation, as in this case, or to allow the API invocation, as you can see now, and forward the traffic to the application service. Okay, so at last you may wonder, how does the configuration looks like? The configuration for each API looks like this. So we have the x-permission custom extension of the OpenAPI specification that wraps up the entire Rönd configuration for each specific API. With the allow field, we specify which is the name of the policy that needs to be executed for this specific API. With the resource filter, we can configure the query generation feature of Rönd, while with the response filter, we can configure the name of the policy that needs to be executed during the response flow. So when the application service has replied to the client application, and Rönd is in charge of modifying the response body. Since we are actively working on Rönd and trying to improve it as much as we can, there are several issues with new ideas and improvements. For example, we have just filed a proposal for a different configuration structure. If you have any ideas or new proposal, feel free to open new issues or interact with the one already existing. Okay, after speaking about how to configure Rönd, let's see how to write policies in Rego. Today we will see a few basic examples that you can find in the repository linked in this slide. If you think that it would be nice to have more contents about how to write Rego policies, please leave a comment. Okay, so the first policy we're seeing today is a simple grant policy. In this case, we are configuring it using the allow configuration property, and the policy is named verify_authorization. With this policy, we are simply taking the request headers, accessing to the authorization header, and verifying its content. We are simply doing a string comparison, but you can do much more with Rego built-ins, such as JVT serialization and validation. The second example we are seeing today is a query generation policy. In this case, the data filter policy uses the data.resources keyword that we defined and performs some equality checks on it. These equality checks are later interpreted by Rönd that generates a query that will be provided in the header you specified in the configuration. This query is generated using Mongo right now, Mongo language, but several new query languages will be supported in the future. The last example is a response policy example. In this case, the basic info parser policy will take the response body from your application service, assuming it is a JSON that contains a secret token field. It will filter out this field. You can see this policy returns the response, and this response is taken by Rönd and forwarded to the client application. Okay, we are at the end of the video, but before saying goodbye, let's share some final thoughts. In fact, thanks to Open Policy Agent, we managed to build a blazing fast general-purpose microservice that can be easily introduced in any application with little to none changes in the codebase. At last, again, Rönd is actively maintained, and don't hesitate to let us know what you think about it. Okay, I'm leaving here some links that we believe that may be useful to you. The first one is the official documentation site. The second one is the official repository for Rönd. And the third is the discussion board for Rönd. Use it to file any question, ideas, proposal that you have. The fourth link is the Open Policy Agent documentation. And the fifth is a blog post from Mia platform that explains why we adopted RBAC and how we managed to do it with Rönd. Thank you for your interest. If you find that Rönd can suit your needs, feel free to let us know in a comment or by leaving a star to the repository. It has been a pleasure, and just keep in touch. Bye-bye.